Hello, friends, and welcome to the very first episode of C Club's podcast. This has been a long time in the coming, and I am so excited to bring it to the world. Today we have Aaron Wright. Aaron is the co-founder of OpenLaw, team behind such projects as the DAO, Flamingo DAO, Neptune DAO, and a whole host of others that he'll share about in this conversation. We talk about all things DAOs and the value of having a sense-making organism. We talk about his excitement for the Metaverse being the next big play in crypto. And of course, we dive into social tokens. A couple notes before we jump into today's show. We are very excited to be collaborating with our friends at Songcamp to create our very own jingle song. I don't know what we'll end up calling it, but music for this episode. That project kicks off shortly, so stay tuned. As always, you can check them out at Songcamp on the Twitters or on the internet generally. Until that project is complete, we have the pleasure of using music from Matthew David from Leaving Records, who used Holly Plus. That's a project that we're going to have to touch on at some point in this podcast series. Oh, okay, yes. The reason for this podcast, here's the big picture. I get to have very interesting conversations with people pushing at the edges of the social crypto space. And I thought it was an absolute shame that those were only going into my brain and not into yours. So that's the intention here. We want to bring the future of social crypto to you through conversations with the people building it. I am so excited to bring this to you. And I guess we should just jump right into the show. Aaron, welcome to the pod, man. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Jess. It's really an honor to be on.
Yeah, I love these conversations that we're having here with the podcast because, I feel like it's such a privilege I get to speak to people like yourself on a regular basis and just get to form and inform and update my worldviews on this wild world space that we're sort of playing in. And so my hope here today is that we can dive into just a conversation that we'd probably normally have, but make it available to others. So, I know who you are, but maybe a good place for us to start is for you to give yourself a bit of an introduction.
Yeah, sure. And I love that. I think that's one of the best parts about the crypto space. It is the conversation. It's like living and breathing and constantly evolving. So I'm Aaron Wright, co-founder of OpenLaw. We're actually rebranding the whole project to Tribute Labs. Got into the crypto space in 2011, played a role helping to launch Ethereum. I'm also a law professor, co-authored a book, Blockchain Law and Policy that Harvard published. From that research, began to pull together OpenLaw, now Tribute Labs, and we've been building a whole bunch of different DAOs over the past year, including the DAO, Flamingo DAO, Neptune, and an internet museum called Museo. Great to be on and great to chat.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a few of the subjects that I want to get into. Like, I think this is going to bridge a few areas that I think are very tightly intertwined, but worth diving into separately, like sort of DAOs, social tokens, and the metaverse, and like NFTs sort of playing in between all of those things. So a tweet I saw recently that I saw a response from you to was, I think the question like, what are DAOs even good for? And I think the tweet was, it seems like it's a structure searching for a problem. You've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about DAOs, being really early into DAOs. I'm curious if you could just sort of, what is your answer to that? Are DAOs just a structure searching for a problem?
No, I actually think that there's a solution to a problem. And I think we feel it in the crypto space more than other areas, which is there's just a torrent of information that's being spewed at every single person online. And it's really hard for any one individual to kind of stay up to speed. If you want to kind of keep up to speed in crypto as an individual, you could be spending 20 plus hours a day, literally like cracked out on Adderall, like pounding down energy drinks just to stay awake. And you probably wouldn't be able to really have a strong pulse on what's going on. And I think we're kind of at this point where the only way to begin to marshal information online is to band together in groups. And I think that's what DAOs fundamentally do, or at least kind of where DAOs are today. They create this opportunity for a bunch of different people that have their own networks, their own interests to come together. And by adding in a bank account, the ability to kind of align people's incentives in some way, and also some like governance rules, you can begin to have kind of structured conversations around that. So I think that they solve issues, that they're not really looking for a problem. And I think if we fast forward out 5, 10, 15 years, I think we'll see that DAOs are superior structures to what we have today. And that could be on the investment side, which I know there's a lot of DAO activity today. But I also think it's going to be on the community side too. It's going to enable groups of folks that are interested in a particular topic, a particular NFT, or set of NFTs, a particular person or celebrity, a particular area, they can all band together and begin to do things more productively together. And I think we feel this online. If you've spent a lot of time online, when I see tweets like that, I just worry that that person isn't as internet native as others.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question. Is like, where are we seeing the big barrier when people like either get it or don't get it? Do you think it is just that they're not living internet natively, or is there sort of like another confusing piece of DAOs that is acting as a barrier to adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like all of crypto. It's the jargon, like what the heck's a DAO, decentralized autonomous what? Nobody's going to understand that. The tooling is super rough. And I think we both feel that between some of the communities that you're helping to support in C Club and the communities that we're working with. And I think it is in part just folks that really live and breathe online versus writing for traditional publication, or not really diving in as deep into the nooks and crannies of the internet. And I just think that their world is a little bit different than folks whose world is either primarily or entirely internet native.
So I want to jump into a couple of like the DAOs that you and the OpenLaw team slash, sorry, what's it called now?
Tribute Labs, yeah.
Tribute Labs, all right, have created. But I get the sense, I mean, I think I first met you in Berlin in 2019, and that's when I fell down the DAO rabbit hole. And I remember my experience in 2019 being one of more frustration, I would say, than excitement, or maybe excitement turned frustration, just seeing how the tools were even more rough. But there's still like a lot of, it didn't feel like we were making a lot of progress. And I know you've been focused in and around DAOs for probably even many years before that. I'm curious, like, how has your understanding, or maybe in the ways that you described DAOs, shifted from when you first got interested in the topic to today?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I remember reading about DAOs, it was even before Ethereum's launch. There was Dan Larimer who wrote this really interesting article on Bitcoin Magazine about decentralized autonomous corporation, or DAC, and I just thought it was fascinating because it was one of the first major attempts, or part of a whole bunch of kind of early attempts to generalize Bitcoin. And folks were geeking out around the time with color coins and a whole bunch of different abstraction layers that could be built on top of Bitcoin. And Ethereum really kind of captured that energy. I think the core concepts around DAOs has largely stayed the same, right? There's kind of a wing where the thought is that you can use democratic processes to kind of channel group decision making. And then there's a more futuristic wing that's really focused in on even replacing humans and as part of the decision-making process and using algorithms at its core. That energy, not surprisingly, first manifested with the DAO itself, like the first experiment with the DAO in the Ethereum ecosystem. That was a spectacular disaster. I mean, it was spectacular. You saw all these different folks from around the globe pooling capital. I think the core vision of what the DAO wanted to do was a good one. It just ran into technical and then eventually legal issues. And then people just got kind of swept up in the token mania from 2016 to 18. And I think as the hangover from that mania began to subside, we started to see what I think is one of the strengths of the Ethereum ecosystem, which is the devs really focus in on some of the narrow issues that the DAO itself exposed. And also some of the additional tech tooling around it has constantly improved. And by 2019, when we first met, Jess, I think I saw, because I remember walking in ETH Berlin and just being like, DAOs are going to hit their moment soon. And I kind of internally had a hypothesis about that before Berlin. And I walked out after Berlin just saying that this is the time, that the timing is now right. And that's in part why we kind of jumped in with 2 feet into the pool with DAOs.
I mean, the number of DAOs that you have been a part of, at least through now Tribute Labs, I think is quite outstanding. And so I guess it started with the Lao, and then more recently Flamingo, Neptune, Museo. Can you maybe just give a high level overview of each? And then I'm really interested in sort of what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the concept with the Lao was we should reboot the DAO itself, the original DAO experiment, and try to do it in a way that complies with US law. So in my mind, it was a little bit like the move we saw from Mt. Gox to Coinbase. So Mt. Gox was pretty awesome. Kind of pioneered the exchange model. It had security issues that were created by the team itself or an outside attacker. And then it had a whole bunch of regulatory uncertainty surrounding the exchange model. We saw in the US, at least, Coinbase, dot I's and cross T's on the legal and regulatory side, and really paved the way for all digital assets, including Bitcoin, Ether, and all the other assets that we see now. And that really opened up a really broad area for people to experiment and play with. Our thought was with the DAO, we could try the same thing. We thought these DAO models were interesting, that groups of people that were connected via smart contracts and different tooling could make better decisions than a more traditional venture capital fund or something that was aspiring to back projects. And that's where we started. So we opened it up to the public in April of 2020. It took a couple months for folks to kind of pile in. And this is when ETH was kind of at one of its low points around that time. And so we got a whole bunch of, true believers that were together, and the experiment seemed to work. Right? We had pretty good deal flow. Projects and teams liked that the community was backing them. And we were able at that time and continue to support a whole bunch of fantastic projects in lots of different categories, from NFTs and social tokens to DeFi to infrastructure to DAO tooling. It kind of runs the gamut. But the concept around the DAO itself was not just to be one DAO. It was really to foster an ecosystem of DAOs. So the notion was that the DAO would be kind of the first DAO, and over time we'd see more and more DAOs emerge. The first DAO that the members of the DAO incubated and conceived of was Flamingo. We made and saw the growing NFT ecosystem. We were early backers of Super Rare, Bagachi, Flow, NFTFi, a whole bunch of others, and just began to really develop a core hypothesis around NFTs. The thought was that a separate DAO would make more sense to collect NFTs than kind of appending that directly into the DAO. And so we launched Flamingo. And at this point, I think we've acquired about 1,600 NFTs and also done some equity investments through that DAO too, which is pretty awesome. And it's the same story with Neptune. Neptune really was kind of the brainchild of a handful of members of the DAO, even before we saw different ways to participate and support DeFi projects. We were thinking about something like Neptune. It took a little bit of time to get the structuring down right, but once we know that, we opened that up too. And the same thing with Museo. Museo was kind of a reaction to some mechanics that we saw occurring organically after Flamingo DAO acquired a high-priced CryptoPunk and Alien with a purple cap. We began to see people just kind of shooting NFTs to the address that the Alien had. It was like they were providing the Alien with tribute, like some sort of recognition. They wanted the Alien to see their work. So we thought that was a fun mechanic, and we wanted to pull on that thread too. And we also thought it made sense to not just have groups of people collecting NFTs, but also preserving them and kind of maintaining them for the long haul, which we thought was missing in the ecosystem. So that's kind of the process in terms of how we've been able to support DAOs. It's been very organic and curated. It's very member directed and driven. The members hop in and give product feedback and really begin to kind of support and really think through what these DAOs should look like. And I think that gives the ecosystem the ability to time things right. I think we timed the NFT marketplace right. Hopefully, some of these other opportunities we timed right too.
So I'm curious, just for context, like how many members, what's the size of the communities normally in like the DAO and the Flamingo?
Yeah, so due to U.S. regulatory constraints, we cap it at 99 members. It's not my choice. It's just when you get above that, you run into some potentially very complicated legal issues. So we wanted to avoid that. Each DAO has at this point between 60 and 70 members. So it's a nice group of folks. It's not too big. It's not too small. And across the DAOs, I think there's about 160 members. So there's some overlap between them. The folks that are members, they have built significant projects in the space, or many folks have been floating around Bitcoin or Ethereum or some combination of the two pretty much from the beginning. There's a lot of like OG blood flowing around the different DAOs.
I love it. Tribute Labs, OG blood. So I think it's really interesting, the number of people, because I think we see such a variety of sizes and structures of projects. And one of the things that always just, I think, blows people's minds a little bit and consistently blows my mind is just like the amount of value that can be created by a small number of people holding tokens or holding membership in these organizations. I think about the social token space where there's 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 people holding these tokens, and the network value of these projects being in the multiple millions, and just try to sort of cast my brain forward a little bit and think about what's scaling. And I think I saw some stats where there's like 100,000 collectors in the NFT space, and it's just like so small and so early in so many ways. So for there to be less than 200 people in the broader ecosystem around those projects, I think is quite fascinating. One of the other things that I think many folks are interested about is like, how does work get done in these organizations? And I think the way that you guys have built out these structures, everybody has skin in the game, but they also are more like funds, and funds traditionally have passive investors and core teams that are managing them. Is there sort of like a rule of thumb or like a general breakdown that you're seeing across these organizations as far as the number of people who really lean in and do the work? And how does that dynamic work out?
Yes, they're different than funds. There's no one party that's in charge. So it's entirely managed by the members. It's very flat. So I think we've seen some other DAOs that in many ways are just recreating the past. They're just setting up like governing boards or kind of like a small group of people that are managing assets and making decisions. It doesn't really work like that inside of Flamingo or the Lao or Neptune. Instead, it really starts as a conversation around a particular topic or opportunity. You kind of see some energy forming around it, and folks, whether that's members or sometimes will help kind of push us along, almost like a mod on the subreddit, will begin to put up some soft polling to see if people are interested in a particular topic, and then eventually it will gravitate and get memorialized into a more formal governance vote of some sort. And through that, people participate at different levels. We have some members that have joked that like participating in these DAOs, it's their favorite game, like their favorite video game. Like even though they manage other people's money, they run their own fund or something like that, they tend to come to the conversations inside of the Lao, Flamingo, or Neptune first, just because they're well structured and you can kind of get a clear pulse on what's interesting at any point in time. There's some folks that are more passive, and that's fine too. In my mind, and this is an analogy I've used for a while, it's like a message board, right? You're going to have people that are heavy posters and participating a ton. You're going to have people that are lurking, and you don't know if they're participating or not, but they're voting. They're like participating that way. And then you'll have people that don't check in that often or kind of periodically check in. But even there, it works. One project that we backed in Flamingo was a project involving an artist, Micah Johnson. He put together this character, a black astronaut called Aku, and the member that flagged it is not one of our or folks that participate heavily, but he thought this was a great opportunity. It was one of a handful of times that he's kind of jumped up and raised his hand to note this to other folks, and that meant a lot. And I think that that's part of the reason why it works. When you get like a smaller group of manager or like a board that's in charge, it's really hard to kind of capture some of that emergent energy and see opportunities because they're kind of laser focused. A bit of a groupthink kind of sets in amongst those handful of people. And by making it a little bit broader, making it a little less structured, making it a little bit more flat, I think you gain opportunities for a bit of a better noise to signal ratio.
I love the idea of like multiplayer games, and it sounds like the core of what's working there is it is fun, it is social, and yeah, why were people on early message boards? It was for to learn, to be a part of something, the sense of belonging. But there's also a sense of momentum that I think exists as ideas and projects get pushed forward or discovered, and it is interesting to see.
Yeah, and there's capital. I think that's the other thing, right? Like once you bind people together, through capital or through an asset of some sort, whether that's Ether, whether that's a native token, it kind of pushes people in the right direction. So our approach to government or governance has been much more flat than I think some of the other DAO models that have emerged. And what we do at the Tribute Lab side is we're like a mod on the subreddit. We kind of push things forward. We're like a helping hand. And that just by clearing out some of the like administrative cruft and like adding a little bit more structure, just in terms of getting people to focus on different things, like voting or a conversation that's probably worth weighing in on, and enables things to push forward, I think, more rapidly than what we've seen in other DAOs.
Yeah, to me, it seems like the sort of evolving organizational structure is one of the core areas of innovation that I think we'll see creating value in the next little while. Because I think like in a structure like say the Lao or Flamingo, it is still fairly structured, even if like within your world it is unstructured. Like the structure is who gets in and who doesn't. And so I think there's like these levels of, I guess, gravity or sort of network just distribution that are very interesting. And I'm curious of your thoughts on like, are we going to see million person DAOs or are the ones that work going to be much more smaller, tighter collectives?
Yeah, I think the answer is you're probably going to see both, right? I don't think at this point we've done that innovation when it comes to governance yet to know how to manage something as complex as that collectively. And I think we're going to see a whole bunch of folks experiment with it. There'll probably be a whole bunch of challenges at the tech level related to it, at the regulatory layer related to it, but they'll get sifted through over time. And I imagine in the long run, we'll see some very, very large DAOs with lots and lots and lots of different members that are part of it or participants. I just don't know if we're there yet. And frankly, I don't know if the tech is kind of there yet. So our thought was start to sort out some of these issues in these smaller groups, and then you can begin to generalize it out over time. It's like scaling, right? Like if you can't figure out how to serve, let's say like a website up to 1 million people, you can't expect to serve that up to 1 billion people until you kind of sort out those technical and governance patterns.
Yeah, I think I both agree with that and think that the thing that gets us to 1 million users is going to look so different than any of the approaches we're taking right now. I think the hardest part for me is to both scan for things that are going to solve the immediate problems that we're facing in Seed Club or in some of our projects, but also try to stay open-minded enough to see how the next level of evolution might come to be.
That seems right to me, Jess. Like even if you think about like social media, right? Like let's do like a quick archival history of social media. You could almost pull it back to like AOL Instant Messenger and away messages, right? Like that was pretty much a similar kind of concept as like the initial like feed or wall that Facebook and Instagram and all these other Twitter, right? They all kind of riffed on. So I think we'll see like the threads of it. Then folks will in like some of these smaller DAOs, and then people will pick up on it and run with it over time. Like I think things always kind of rhyme or things get magnified in different ways. But the initial patterns I think we'll begin to see in some of these smaller groups, or at least that's my hypothesis.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. You're someone who has, I think through your career made a bunch of early bets, like, early on in Ethereum, very early into DAOs, very early into NFTs. I'm curious, like, what are you excited about right now when you kind of look out over the next 6 to 18 months?
Metaverse, yeah, 1,000%. And that's you asked this question before I didn't get to it, but the other DAOs that are kind of forthcoming out of the DAO ecosystem, there's going to be a Metaverse DAO called Neon that we're pulling together with the folks from MDAO and Artifact. There's going to be, and it's already formulated, play to earn DAO called Ready Player DAO, which is pretty cool. Everything's a little tongue in cheek. We've taken our fake internet money to buy fake internet horses and are breeding out more fake internet horses and helping to build one of the first internet stables around a project called Zedrun. And then the last thing that we're interested in is kind of NFTs as characters, and we're beginning to explore that with our high-value CryptoPunk. We're going to roll out something called Alien DAO too. That's coming in, I'd say, like the next 2 to 4 weeks. Some of them are already in progress. They just haven't been publicly announced yet.
That's amazing. So I'm curious if you can maybe highlight your metaverse thesis. What is getting you excited about the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the metaverse is going to be the context for the generation that's coming up. So, folks that are between the ages of like 8 and 18 have probably spent more time over the past couple of years in some metaverse or metaverse-like environment than they have surfing the internet, right? Like through the World Wide Web. And I think that the tech is finally there, both on the graphic side, on the blockchain side, and just in general through WebGL and some other tools, such that we can begin to see like an open, permissionless metaverse emerge, one or more of them. And I think it's going to take some time to build these out. They're going to probably need to be open and permissionless for people to feel comfortable building on them. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of mature these ecosystems. So it feels to me like early Bitcoin, early ETH, or some of the other early projects. And I think in terms of like the opportunity, it's unclear if there's going to be one or more metaverses. My sense is there'll be more than one. It's unclear what will drive value in these ecosystems, but I have a feeling folks will figure that out. And it feels like that the metaverse that will win will require either a degree of scarcity or just lots of people building on it for it to kind of break away from the rest. We've seen larger tech companies like Facebook indicate that they want to build a metaverse, but I don't think folks want to build in like a closed metaverse, especially one that's controlled by a company. It kind of feels like a company town. It feels like the blockchain-based metaverses probably will win in the long run.
I love there's two pieces of that. The idea of like Facebook metaverse being a company town versus sort of more of like the Wild West is really interesting to me. And I can imagine to try to think through like what is the relevant example of the railway coming to town as a way of driving value in these open, sort of more organic organizations. And then the second piece was that I think the idea that most young people have spent more time in these metaverse worlds than surfing the internet. That's frankly a pretty big aha there that I hadn't quite thought through. So these are like Roblox and Fortnite and sort of the game worlds. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think that, during COVID and probably before, just that's the context for most folks. A, they're playing a tremendous amount of video games. B, the difference between like metaverses and video games is narrowing, and it's more social. It's like kind of threads a couple lines. It's not as cold and barren as something like Twitter or Instagram or some of the social media channels. So there's a social dynamic to these metaverses. I think we see this in crypto. People like host events there. We see this with NFTs. People build galleries. They walk around it. And it's nice. Like, it's just a whole different context. And then even going back historically, when people began to think about the internet and conceive it, they conceived it as a virtual world, right? So I think the timing is becoming right for that to really flower and blossom. Or at least that's the hypothesis.
Okay, so it sounds like you have like a number of things ahead of you as far as launching new projects. One of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is distribution or launching. When we work with a number of creators that have significant audiences, the thought of sort of putting a project out into the world, project out to millions of people is kind of terrifying, especially seeing as how fast speculative interest can flow into these communities. Obviously, you have a little bit of a different structure given that they're highly curated, accredited only, sort of joining these organizations. But I'm curious if you've noticed a difference in launching something like the DAO during a bear market and launching something like Neptune or Museo during a bull market.
Yeah, completely. With the DAO and Flamingo, it was first come, first serve. And it took a couple months to kind of have all the initial members join. With Neptune, that began to shift. We tend to open the DAOs up to members first so that they can join. And then if there's anything left over, then we open up to the public. And for Neptune, it's like about a $35 million vehicle in US dollar terms. It took an hour to close. So in the context of like a fund or fund-like structure, that's really fast. If somebody was going to go out and raise like a very traditional investment vehicle, it would take them months to raise that capital. It took an hour for Neptune to kind of reach a comparable level, which is pretty astounding. I do think we are sifting through different mechanics on how to roll things out to kind of balance some of these competing interests. It's not my choice to limit it to accredited investors. Frankly, it's not. If I was in charge for a day, I'd probably change a lot of these rules. But we're kind of taking the rule set where it is and doing our best to work with it.
Yeah, because I think it just speaks to the just so many challenges in the structuring of these. Beyond just legal structuring, but like the practical nature of it. Because great to be able to sell out $35 million worth of allocation in an hour, and also I'm always like, I can't remember who said it, but the sort of belief that the smartest people don't work for your organization, or maybe the smartest people aren't in your DAO. And so this idea of how do we, if the goal of these organizations is to be a sense-making organism, how are we ensuring that we're reaching out into the fringes that maybe we were once a part of before we kind of became a center of sense-making in the space? How are you thinking about like going to the edges and bringing people in from those edges?
For Neon, it's a good example. We have 20 plus builders, creators in the metaverse. They're just super close to the metal. And they're kind of really going to be driving Neon and our endeavors into the metaverse. We started that process in Flamingo. That's part of the strategies. It's a metaverse strategy. And we just realized that there's so much opportunity or potential opportunity that we wanted to get even closer to it. So I think finding those...
Right. It makes sense. You're sort of like embedding them early at the beginning spot. It's like sort of like the first seeds that are planted are, of those people, and then the community sort of forms around it.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think with anything, you want like a mix, right? If it's all just very early folks, maybe they're young, maybe they're inexperienced, maybe they don't have enough capital. You kind of want a mix of a whole bunch of different people kind of working together. I will say, like, across the DAOs, that there tends to be a preference for folks that are actively involved, right? That are close, so that you can have that sense-making machine, which is a nice way to phrase it, Jess.
Well, I think that's like, when I think about the biggest difference in my career over the last year or so was just like the number of new nodes into my sense-making network. I'd had a number from, I've been in the space since 2017, and so it's slowly we're building up. But sitting here today, having these conversations and many more like it, I can only imagine. Like it's just, I feel like I have a hard time keeping up with anything, even though I have an amazing network of folks like yourself that are thinking about things and expanding my mind in pretty much every conversation we have. So I think that's it's pretty much the biggest bull thesis for DAOs ever, really. If you think about the importance of filtering information in even a Web 2 context, the billions of dollars of value, hundreds of billions of dollars of value created there. This is just a sort of an evolution, a social and technical evolution from that, which I think is fascinating.
I wanted to just underline that point, Jess, because I think it's really wise. I've been thinking of things in somewhat similar ways. It's like DAOs may be the filter to kind of this emergent, more free market that sits underneath the Ethereum ecosystem. You do need those filters. You have those filters today. If you look at even like how scientific knowledge is produced, right? It goes through these peer reviewed organs to kind of make sense of all the data and information and innovation that happens, or we have trade organizations or all these other kind of filters that kind of support a robust, healthy economy and also a productive one. That is where I think DAOs will sit. And then your questions, which you're circling on, and I don't think anybody would frankly claim to be an expert. I definitely don't. I think we still have a lot to learn there. Is how do you structure these the right way? I think that's going to just be a journey, and we're kind of on that journey together to figure it out. And we're doing our best. I know, and have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you and the rest of the folks at C Club are doing. And I feel like we're all learning from each other, and it's through that kind of iterative, collaborative learning process that we'll tackle this and build something even better than what we have today. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Like that's I mean, I think that there's so much like you need to have that sort of. I think hopefully that last line there's like absolutely essential because I think there's a lot of naivete in. I mean, I was early into social media and I felt it very viscerally. Right, this is going to change the world, and was not expecting the sort of aggregation theory to be such a thing. And so, but I do think there's a lot. I mean, at least the folks that I get to spend time with, like there's a lot of consideration for that. Whether that's enough, in any new technological evolution, I don't know, but I share your desire at least of hopefully. Okay, I want to switch topics here a little bit because I could talk to you about DAOs forever, but the thing that brought us together in the first place was social tokens, and the sort of. Well, I've seen you sort of opine on Twitter recently about some of these things, and I think there's meaningful daylight between the topic or context of social tokens and DAOs, but in other ways, probably very, very related. I'm curious, like, what's your interest in social tokens generally, and how do you see them relating to DAOs?
Yeah, I think social tokens are fascinating. One way I've kind of conceptualized just what's going on with Bitcoin and Ethereum and a whole bunch of other token-based projects is that they act as a shelling point for an ecosystem to just rally around and coordinate activity. And so it makes a lot of intuitive sense to me that not just broad networks around something like a store of value like Bitcoin or Web3, which I think is the broadest vision for Ethereum, and the Ether token, which is the shelling point for it, but other smaller networks and ecosystems would also benefit from a token to kind of coordinate activity. So I've always kind of found that fascinating from kind of the earliest experiments that I remember here, which would be like Gavcoin, which is one of the first proofs of concept on ETH, to Tatiana Coin, which kind of bridged Bitcoin and Ethereum, to the Alex token, which I thought was fascinating, and some of the other social tokens that we're seeing, whether that's Friends with Benefits or RNG or what Brian did with Jam. They're all pretty fascinating. So it's just something I've kind of always been paying attention to. I think that's coming. There is like some weird confluence, like you noted, I think a couple minutes ago, around like social tokens, NFTs, DAOs. I don't fully know what the construct looks like yet in my mind, but it's something I'm constantly always trying to figure out and work through.
Yeah, it seems as if like the category just keeps expanding as I try to think through like the appropriate way to sort of describe this world that we play in with C Club, and it's getting even more complicated or interesting, I guess, with fractionalization and party bids and this sort of new tools that are allowing for different types of coordination and mutual ownership or gameplay. There's a joke every time I speak with Pri. Actually, we joke about it's just DAOs all the way down. And I think it's that coordination layer at every single layer, even around a single NFT that maybe has 2 or 200 fractional owners around. So A term that you've used quite a bit as it relates to social tokens is this idea of digital salons. So I think a tweet that you sent out is social tokens will first find their footing supporting a new generation of digital salons. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody just has spent way too much time online. You just feel like every message board eventually gets watered down and destroyed. If you go to like early subreddits, they were great, right? They felt like intimate. They felt a little bit more friendly. The quality, I think, at least early on, was pretty high. And then as those platforms and as that kind of core use case, like a message board or subreddit or other online community grows, it just kind of dies. Like some of the specialness of it. I think social media, just going back to what you said before, was a little bit like that too, right? Like Facebook at 20 million users feels a lot different than Facebook today. Twitter at 20 million users feels a lot different than Twitter at 200 plus or whatever the total number of users is now. And a lot of like the bad parts of those systems get magnified, and some of the good pieces are lost. I think one of the advantages of social tokens is they create scarcity, and that scarcity means that you can have tighter groups online, which should increase the quality of the conversation there by like using a token as a gatekeeper in some sort of way. I just think you can keep online communities open-ended and fluid and somewhat permissionless, but at the same time not make them so unwieldy that the core benefit of that devolves. And I think Friends with Benefits is a great example, early example of that. I love checking out the conversations that happen there. It's pretty astounding, and to me that feels like a digital salon, which is funny because even if you go back to like Web 1, people constantly wanted to build digital salons. That's why salon.com was started, right? As an example. So I just think we're kind of going back to some of the core concepts around the internet. We just have better tools to implement them now. And so I'm super excited about that kind of concept. I also think a lot about maybe this is the New Yorker in me, just like having constraints and scarcity kind of provides some of the magic. So the fact that you can only fit like X number of people in like a bar or in, a restaurant or in, a bakery, it just creates like a lot of buzz, excitement, and it just has a whole different feel than something that's just given away for free and open-ended. And I think that's kind of what we're getting back to, like the ability to begin to like model out some of the good parts of physical spaces in the digital world.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. This idea of an occupancy limit for a digital space, I think I've seen you tweet about before.
Yeah, I don't know how you think about it. I mean, I'd be curious, Jess, but to me and I feel like it's been one-sided. It's supposed to be, conversation, but to me, that's like what's special, right? Like the fact that you can create these like smaller groups, like you noted before, right? Like these groups can become pretty powerful in terms of their impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I think like I mean, there's a couple levels that I find this stuff fascinating on. One is, is that this community first focus. So C Club is really focused on community tokens, and it's really sort of leaning into this insight that I think you're sharing here, which is, if you get great people together on the internet, interesting things happen. So collaboration leads to cool stuff. But the thing that was missing from most Facebook groups is the fact that there isn't sort of a shared skin in the game or upside. This idea of having like a cap table and a bank account that's run by members, I think is the thing that gives these communities superpowers. And so I think on one part it is like, yeah, like when we're seeing some of our communities have 100 people in it and the conversation be phenomenal and could go on to build really meaningful organizations purely with even an upper limit of 100 people in a broader social context. And also at the same time, I'm thinking of just these like massive swarms like the Wall Street bet world that, for better or for worse, will make use of these tools to really coordinate around really impactful financial outcomes. So I think it's just going to be a whole host of different experiments. But one of the core things we look for is proof of community, because I believe that's the sustaining thing beyond. And maybe I'd contrast that with like an artist or creator that launches a token in and around their fame, maybe a bit clout as an example. It just feels like there's at the very least there's sort of an end date on that, right? Somebody's going to die eventually, and does that live on or not? I mean, you could probably make arguments for both sides, but to me, like a community that has a mission and a why and is sort of like working towards something and is designed properly, ultimately should be able to remove, a core member from that team, and it, maybe even get stronger.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think that's well said.
Where do you think that, so like implied in, I think, your tweet here about social tokens finding finding their footing in digital salons, like, what is that enough? Like, is it enough that we have communities that are like tokenized? I mean, if we look at friends with benefits, so much of, I think, like the magic there is the early community that they were able to bring together. Interesting dynamic. It's novel. The token model is actually pretty brilliant in that people are holding these tokens to be able to get access. But there also feels like there's sort of like an upper limit in that, like at a certain point, like what is it, 5,000, is it 10,000, 100,000? Like Discord becomes just like a cluttered, crazy, ineffective place to hang out together. And we've sort of seen them start to build out, IRL events, tools that support IRL events. I think they just launched or are working on launching an editorial and media section. Like, what's your sense of how something like that evolves?
Yeah, I think that that's going to be one of the interesting conversations. I do think that we'll see outside of like more of these like social salons, people create content together. I mean, that I did a lot with wikis and Wikipedia before I got into all this, and you kind of saw similar dynamics emerge there. A lot of people use this cumbersome wiki software, which was pretty hard to use, to filter out into a smaller group of people just so that they could create content together. So I think some of these like Web 2 concepts like user created stories, fan fiction, user created media of some sort that requires more than one person to create is probably an area that I think we'll see more and more use cases for social tokens. I think it's pretty easy for one person to make, let's say, like an NFT that you'd sell on Super Rare, or a handful of people to work on something like a generative NFT drop. But there's a lot more complex media that we haven't figured out how to collaboratively make online. And I can imagine social and or community tokens helping to facilitate those conversations, like being used as some way to coordinate more complex media creation. And when you're able to freely sell or trade that via an NFT, I think you have the incentives in place to begin to restart some of those experiments. So that's an area I'm pretty fascinated in. What a digital salon evolves into, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe that's enough, right? Like maybe people just need like a community that isn't that many people to join, and people can kind of float in and out of it. Maybe like a 5 or 10,000 person online ecosystem is pretty cool and good enough.
Yeah, I think actually embedded in your experience from the Lao into Flamingo and these other DAOs is probably what we're going to see happen, right? These sort of like early organizations are going to build a brand and a name and attract really great people, and then are going to be sort of directly related to, or new things will be spun out of them, or new sort of partner communities will kind of, fragment out and in the best possible way, sort of focus in on a more niche aspect. I see it in Seed Club already, where I think like maybe one of the best business models for these tokenized communities is kind of doing what we're doing, which is like backing really great projects and providing resources and insight to help them do it, and then also creating a sense of belonging so that there's like a community feel there at the same time. And like, does it make sense for Seed Club to go be in like the to be launching something in the Z ecosystem, or to be trying to build like a collaborative, media creation engine as ourselves? Probably not. But would we want to support somebody who's doing that? Heck yes. There's probably a lot of insight we can provide there. I see it within the FWB ecosystem as well, where there's, Apes Online and a bunch of other sort of derivative communities. And not to mention the fact that they're really leaning into building new products and tools. And so, yeah, I think there's like, the salon is enough, and it's probably a lot more than we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we definitely see this with Flamingo itself metastasizes into like a whole bunch of smaller ecosystems or opportunities. And maybe that's awesome. Maybe that really is, you just kind of let it grow organically. I think that's what makes it hard to kind of give a crisp answer to what that looks like. I guess I'd worry that if you veer too far away from the core mission off the bat, that it may actually kill the project, right? Like if you really start as like a salon off the bat, and then all of a sudden you're turning into like a tech ecosystem, I just feel like the feel may get diluted over time.
I think the interesting thing is like, and we're seeing many of these projects structured as essentially, token graphs, right? There's a series of tokens of finite supply owned partly by the DAO and partly by members, and so there's this like ability to have this network reflected in token ownership for many of these types of organizations. And so I think like the splitting into other focus groups is the way to avoid the watering down of the mission. Like that core mission can still be the thing and needs to be the thing, and that why. And I'm assuming the why will evolve and change just like any. But I think the ones that sustain will hold true to the core insight as best as possible over the years. And as people, I think it's like one of the reasons I'm so excited to be a member of FWB and why I see so many of our projects through C Club excited to be a part of C Club. So there's this like, there's resources and attention and momentum that kind of is inherent to being a part of these communities that can help launch something with more velocity and credibility and momentum ultimately than people would be able to do by themselves. And I think that's kind of a core thing, at least I'm trying to design for in the projects that, especially in C Club. And so through sort of like, building a rocket with a different target planet to sort of rocket off to allows you to sort of maintain that strong core mission within the salon or the original social token, and yet still provide a way for people who have inspiration or insight or excitement about something else to go do it, and there be like a financial or at least an ownership tie back between the two organizations.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. It's like if you were going to like design from first principles an ecosystem, you probably would want it so that you could trade like a social currency, social token for cultural currency, let's say like NFTs, or a tech currency. Maybe that's what we're seeing the glimmers of with some other blockchain projects, like these open permissionless DeFi protocols being like an early example of that. And maybe that's kind of the flywheel that gets everything moving. I just think it's like, I think all this stuff, it's eventually going to gravitate there because it's hyper efficient. I think it has like a nice feel. People like it with NFTs and also with social tokens. To me, that really feels like Web3. Like, I don't know if we have as clear of a picture of where it's going. It's going to just take like experimentation and brilliant entrepreneurs and, brilliant folks to kind of sift through that. A little bit like if we went back to Web1, I don't think anybody could have predicted social media, right? Maybe a handful of folks did, but not that many.
Well, and not in the way that it ultimately manifested, like, or timing. And there's just so much. That's why I call it what we're doing here muddling. I think we're just like muddling forward. I think it's like the fairest description of it, at least how my brain feels like it's approaching things.
I think it's more than muddling. I'd say it's like we're running experiments, and that's the most exciting part of it. And like picking up threads of things that worked before or didn't work, and just remixing them. It's where like the most fun is. Like my working, I really and increasingly am bullish on this point. I just think DeFi to me feels like e-commerce. It's like people trying to basically rebuild what we already have, and NFTs and social tokens really represent to me where things are going, where we get to this point where you have kind of the efficient pricing of networks, which I think may be a decent way to describe social tokens, helping to support and create the representation of culture, whether that's NFTs or other memes, ideas, intellectual property. And that's where this is all going, right? We're not going to create and have folks that are buying, selling, trading crude financial instruments or just kind of governance, which is how it's constructed now. Instead, it's going to be these cultural, social artifacts that people are the most interested in acquiring. And once that ecosystem emerges and grows, I think the whole world looks different. People who are creative are going to, frankly, be rewarded for their output. And that could be creative in terms of making beautiful, interesting things. That could be creative in terms of helping build communities and ecosystems. I just think that that's where most of the world's value is at this point, like in the information age. It's not like trading quasi securities. Like, who wants to do that? Not me.
Man, I couldn't think of a better line to end our call here on. Aaron, I really appreciate you taking the time to join this very nascent, burgeoning, muddling of a podcast.
We're more than muddling, Jess. And you're amazing. Yeah. And C Club's amazing. And we're huge supporters. I know we backed it inside the DAO, and we're happy to do so. I know lots of folks just channeling some conversations from our ecosystem. They love what you're doing, Jess. They love what, all the different communities that are emerging out of C Club. I think we're really just starting to figure it out together.
Yeah, it's the, as somebody who really felt like I was out over my skis quite a bit about a year ago when we started C Club, so much of the progress and the momentum we have here today is because of the support of folks like the Lao and specifically Pri from your team, who's an absolute star, and just the community generally. So I think that it's for folks who are on the outside of this world, maybe that's not quite as visible. If you're only seeing the trading of quasi securities, you see a very thin view of what's happening in the Web3 space. And I totally agree, for all the reasons you gave, and also just the support and caring, I think, that exists in this community. I'm incredibly bullish about the near and far future. Where in this world should we be pointing people to better get to know you or Tribute Labs?
Yeah, so on the Tribute Lab side, if you're interested in DAO tooling, you can go to tributedao.com. If you want to check out the Lao, it's thelao.io. Flamingo DAO, it's flamingodao.xyz. Neptune, it's neptunedao.xyz. Museo, it's museo with a zero, not an O, .xyz. And I'm on Twitter, AWRIGH01.
I think we're going to come do this in a year, and that's going to be an absolute impossibility for you to actually list out every single one of those. It's going to take a whole podcast. All right, Aaron, let's just have a podcast where you just list out all the different DAOs that have come out of the ecosystem, which is, I kind of say is a joke, but probably not a joke, man. Like the speed at which these things are evolving is fascinating.
It's moving fast. It's going to be great. I hope we get to do this every couple months, Jess. It'd be great.
Yeah, totally down to make that happen. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the internet.
All right, later.